I just saw the IMAX 3D version of Tim Burton's new Alice in Wonderland, and here is my review. Tim Burton has tantalized me since Beetlejuice, a film I have watched countless times. I also had only good things to say about his recent versions of Sweeney Todd, and that is a big deal, since I myself played the Demon Barber back in the 80s in a production where we made many of the same changes to the score that they chose to do in Burton's current rendering. Similar to my obsessive love of Sweeney Todd, which includes a collection of antique straight razors, I have always been attached to Lewis Carroll's Alice books, and particularly the Mad Hatter, having been known to wear a top hat for most of my life. I have sifted carefully through the annotated Alice, and have seen every film production, including the porn musical one, and the brilliant stage version with Meryl Streep, done by Elizabeth Swados, at the Public Theater in 1980. I was glad to hear that other fans were dressing up to go see Burton's new 3D Alice in Wonderland, so I wouldn't have to be too ashamed. I had been surprised to find a few other Sweeneys in attendance at the opening of that film, yet there were no other Mad Hatters in the sold-out crowd at the IMAX theater when I went to see how Wonderland looked in 3D. I received many compliments and giggles in response to my new top hat, which had been designed based on the hat Johnny Depp wears in the film. It has already become clear that the character of the Mad Hatter would be at least somewhat expanded in Burton's retelling of the Alice fables. I mean, really, would you relegate Johnny Depp to a minor role in an epic fantasy picture? Me neither. I was a bit surprised to find that the screenplay tinkered with the plot much more drastically. I was tempted to be a purist and get upset at Linda Wolverton's retooled storyline for Alice and her world of mad folk, which in fact is Underland. Apparently Alice got the name wrong initially. In the end, however, I feel it was a valid decision, perhaps even the best choice, faced with material that is unquestionably obscure, dated, and of questionable sexual ethics. It is hard to be sure of the exact nature of the relationship between Lewis Carroll, aka Reverend Charles Dodgson, and the real Alice Pleasance Little. The 1985 film Dreamchild, starring Ian Holm as Lewis Carroll, shows how odd and suspicious their association was, and the film does not mention that Dodgson photographed Alice as well as other young girls. It's not clear there was any real impropriety, but a case for it is pretty easy to make. Add to that the lack of cohesion in the storyline of the books, especially through The Looking Glass, which has the plot formed based on moves in a game of chess. And it starts to make sense that the new 3D Alice in Wonderland takes such a radical approach to the storyline. This Alice is nearly grown up, and is slated to be married off to a young but unpleasant lord when she runs off and falls down the infamous rabbit hole. It eventually becomes clear that she is revisiting a place where she had been as a child, which in fact makes this film a sort of a sequel to the original stories. Our young adult heroine believes she is in a dream and learns to become herself by defeating the Jabberwocky dragon. It is a very clear plot compared to the meandering episodes of the original adventures, and while I wondered why the White Knight was absent despite his line about believing impossible things before breakfast being an essential theme, I like the idea that Alice got to be the hero rather than an impudent onlooker. It seemed odd at first to have Alice become the beamish boy of the original Jabberwocky's text, and there is a part of me that regrets the tinkering, but if I were making up a modern fairy tale, I'd want to give young women a cool role model too. There is also a curiouser and curiouser veneer of the plotline of The Wizard of Oz, or perhaps Wicked, to be more precise, in setting the Red and White Queens as feuding sisters. And Anne Hathaway's diaphanous White Queen is distinctly Glinda-like in her voice and mannerisms, and to top it off, Alice is granted her return home after defeating the enemy. Turns out the Red Queen owns the Jabberwocky. Who knew? And her farewell scene with Johnny Depp really evokes Dorothy and the Scarecrow. I nearly expected her to say, "Oh, Mad Hatter, I think I'll miss you most of all." It is also interesting to note, as my companion pointed out to me, that putting a film in IMAX 3D really taxes the art design department, even for a master like Tim Burton. Not all the details of the makeup and costumes stood up to the intense scrutiny we all become capable of in this new ultra-high resolution medium. I must confess I found my eyes most gratified by the closing credits sequence during which a magical garden slowly grows. Thanks, Weirdos. See you next time.